I just want to thank Gil once again for having me. As he stated, I'm an entertainment journalist, veteran entertainment journalist based here in Los Angeles, and I'm a proud member of the African American Film Critics Association. So I am so honored to kick off Women's History Month, the first day of Women's History Month, with two of the top female film directors in the business. They're hot right now. So we feel really, really lucky to have them here to discuss their career and talk to us for quite some time today. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about anything else. I want to really, really get into it. But I first want to introduce Miss Garrett Bradley. She is the filmmaker behind the documentary Time, which is like critically acclaimed, won an award at Sundance. And basically it follows the quest of this woman who is trying to get her husband out of prison. He's been sentenced to 60 years for a bank robbery. And it's just wonderfully told, kind of interwoven with documentary film. I think it's probably old film footage from a couple of years ago and then spliced with stuff from today. And it's just a wonderful story that's told. Really heartbreaking, but wonderfully told. And then we also have Miss Channing Godfrey Peoples. She is the phenomenon behind the drama Miss Juneteenth. Now, this drama follows a woman who is a single mother, and she also is a former beauty queen, entering her daughter into the local Miss Juneteenth pageant. And of course, that film has received critically acclaimed reviews as well. So without further ado, I want to get right into it, ladies. The first thing I want to know is I want both of you guys to talk to me about the road that you took to get your projects on the big screen. And either of you can go first. Well, you know what? We'll have Garrett go first. How about Garrett?
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say thank you again for being here. And Channing, we haven't seen each other since Sundance, and I'm just so happy to be with you right now as well. Okay, so I'm going to try to consolidate this into a sort of condensed storyline, because how projects come into fruition, as I'm sure Channing can speak to as well, can be a bit long-winded. But Time really comes out of making a short film, a short op-doc, which was 13 minutes long, called Alone. And I always use this question as an opportunity to encourage people who are interested in making films or who have ideas and are looking for a sort of viable outlet. I didn't know anybody at the New York Times. Alone was a short New York Times op-doc, as I mentioned. And I went to the website, newyorktimes.com/opdocs, and I submitted a story. I submitted something that I was bearing witness to in my immediate community, which was a girlfriend of mine who was in love with somebody who was awaiting trial in a private prison for about 1.5 years and was trying to figure out, as a mother and as a partner, how to move through her life with so much uncertainty and without a lot of support around her. And I had sort of conceived of that film actually as being a series of intergenerational conversations that would be with women who really could offer support to one another because of the stigma around incarceration and not having a lot of resources. And I contacted an organization called FLIC, Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. And Gina Womack, who's the co-director and founder of that organization, picked up and said, the first person Law needs to speak with is Fox Rich. And so I met Fox in the process of making that short film, and it felt inevitable that we continue to talk about incarceration from the family's point of view, from the Black feminist point of view, from a point of view that focuses on the effects of incarceration. So that's kind of how it came to be.
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot going here. Channing, would you like to step up and tell your road?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say first, it's so wonderful to be here with you, KJ. And I was so excited about this conversation. And Garrett knows offline how I feel about her. I adore her work. And, she's just referenced Alone. And I remember seeing Alone and just absolutely, leaning forward and just going crazy over it. She's such a special talent. And, Garrett mentioned how, talking about a movie coming together can be long-winded, and I totally agree, because there's so much that goes into making these films, especially films that center Black women. It often takes time to get these films made. I can say with Miss Juneteenth, I was making a film the Senator Black woman who had this dream deferred about this community that people hadn't seen on film before. Right. So, you know, people weren't like, you know, jumping up and down to produce this film initially. You know, it was a journey to get it made. I think I had early ideas for it probably a decade ago, and probably had a first draft 7 years ago. And, you know, it took 7 years to get the film made. And that 7 years was really spent, you know, really focusing on the script, but also taking it through different development programs. My producer, who also happens to be my husband, we met in film school. He had this great idea. He said, let's submit the film to different programs like Sundance and San Francisco Film Society and Austin Film Society. And it really helped us. It gave us notes for the film. And so it helped us push the script forward, but it also gave us greater ideas about what the production value could be. So, you know, I think personally, the film has been with me. I say it's been with me in my entire life because it's such a personal film. There's so many parts of it that are inspired by my life. Just like the mother and daughter journey was inspired by me having watched my mom, you know, navigate her own dreams and raising children. And Juneteenth was such a big part of the fabric of my life. And Miss Juneteenth itself was so formative for me. You know, it was a scholastic beauty pageant for young Black women. Yeah. And so growing up, that's what I could look to for my own sense of representation. You know, I've said before, it was like my own version of Miss America in real time, you know. So I think the film comes from so many places, but I definitely wanted, you know, my heart is in creating stories that center Black women.
Yeah. You know, one of the things we often don't talk about enough, I think, in Hollywood is that whenever you see a great work of art on the big screen, everybody loves it. You get lauded, you get praise, but people forget the obstacles that you often have to overcome to get it on the big screen. And I think as women of color, particularly Black women, the obstacles are double. You know, whatever it is for any other women, it's usually 2 to 3 times even harder for us. And I'd love each of you guys to discuss some of the obstacles that you had to overcome and the challenges that you had in bringing this to the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, I think KJ, you're absolutely right. And I think part of the challenges that I've personally experienced, but also I think observed when we think about Black women filmmakers is an absence around a conversation that is rooted in the craft, that is rooted in actually talking about the form of filmmaking. I think oftentimes we are put in positions of having to talk about everything else. And we are in, you know, it takes a lot to make a beautiful film, and it takes, you know, a sort of director's eye. And it's being a director is, I think it's a practice in communication. You know, you're communicating with many, many different types of people who understand things differently, who have different priorities. And it's sort of a miracle that anything gets finished in its totality, in its cohesiveness, in the way in which somebody envisions initially, months, years prior, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, how is the camera working? How are we making these creative choices around music, around tone, around performance? I don't think there's enough space for us to really talk about those things. And I, moving forward in the world, would love to hear more from other Black women filmmakers about their creative choices, just as much as the obstacles that they've had to overcome in getting to be able to make those creative choices.
Yeah, agreed.
This is part of the reason why I love Garrett Bradley so much, because I agree with that wholeheartedly. I've had these conversations a lot, you know, even in kind of press conversations. You know, I'll kind of guide people and say, you know, I'd love to be able to talk about the craft and making the film. You know, these films are obviously like journeys, you know, and there's a lot that goes into making them. But yes, there are very intentional choices that I think we have made as filmmakers, you know, first. And yes, you do have to talk about all the other stuff. You know, I would tell people jokingly when they would ask me, was I a former Miss Juneteenth?
Of course, that's what everyone wants to know. Are you the inspiration?
I know, and I get it. It's a valid question, but in asking that question, I'd also like to be asked about being, a storyteller and a filmmaker, and the choices made, in creating this film about a woman who has this dream deferred and is balancing her own regrets and her hopes for the future for her child. So there are things that I'd love to be asked. So I agree with Garrett, about asking us about the craft. Like, there are particular choices in this film. Like, I wanted the film, like, this community that the film is made in is a community that was at once this really bustling Black enclave of like Black commerce and Black business. And today it's being gentrified. And so I guided the film, and that guided the film. Like, I wanted everything to feel like it was slightly past its expiration date, like to feel lived in, to have like this timeless quality. And those are the kind of things that I love to be able to discuss. Garrett, after I saw Alone, like, Garrett has been doing this incredible work forever. So, we can talk about her level of experience. I've been doing this for a while. I went to film school and was making the same kind of films, in film school. So yes, I would love to be asked about the craft more. And then I also have to give y'all the disclaimer. I have a very active toddler. You might hear from time to time in the background. So you'll see me go on and off mute. This is like filmmaker duty and mommy duty at the same time.
Well, see, people love that. They love to know that you have a life outside of the film and everything that's going on. Let me ask you this. So much has been discussed, especially with the Hollywood Foreign Press Association and the Golden Globes happening last night, and the fact that they don't have any Black members. So much emphasis is put on showing the Black point of view. But oftentimes when we hear that, it's usually through a male lens. Very rarely is it through a female lens. And so I'm wondering if you guys want to talk about the value of female-driven stories, particularly Black female-driven stories in this time that everybody's so aware of Black stories and Black Lives Matter, and really showing a different point of view other than the predominant point of view that's been around for decades in Hollywood.
Yeah, I it's interesting because my inspiration for making films that center Black women is obviously first and foremost, I'm a Black woman. Right. I was raised by a Black woman, but I also grew up in this interesting way. I didn't, I came to film later. It wasn't like I, as a kid, I was saying, I want to be a director. I didn't see the infrastructure for that where I was from. I was a young Black girl in the South. And so what I had access to was a small community theater that my mom would take us to, coincidentally called Sojourner Truth.
Oh, wow.
It was her way to keep her, artistic ambitions alive, like she had a love for the arts. And so she would take us to this small theater. So I got to see really complex Black plays. Like, I remember seeing Pearly, and, I remember seeing For Colored Girls that centered Black women. And then I fell in love with the literary greats like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and Gloria Nyler. And what they did was they created stories that centered Black women in all their complexities. And you got to see fully fleshed out stories, about the journeys of Black women, but also focusing on their interior lives. And I missed that in cinema. I can probably count on one hand the number of films that I saw growing up that centered Black women. So that inspired me to want to be able to tell our stories in particular.
Yeah. What about you, Garrett?
Yeah, I think that I was very lucky in high school to have interned for Linda Good Bryant, who's a filmmaker but also community organizer, and it was my first time actually. See, my parents come from painting, from art. And so I had I watched a lot of films when I was little, like a lot of Disney films. My grandmother had like every Disney film, you could think of that I would watch on repeat, but I had never really had hands-on experience of witnessing what it means to be a Black woman and also build a life around your craft, So I think for me, that really set the tone moving forward in my life for what was possible. It really helped to create a framework. And then I think, also, Channing, you mentioned like writers, and I think Zora Neale Hurston is somebody who fits into this conversation in a really profound way, because I think part of, KJ, what you're speaking to, of it being sort of centered around the male experience, is that historically speaking, men have supported each other before they will support women, even Black women, even, within our own community. And so oftentimes when you see Black women who have been able to sort of get to a space where they're able to share their work and they're getting support, they have usually done it by the support of other Black women, right? Through women oftentimes have been the ones that have supported us to get to that space. So it's critical sort of on from every different perspective from which you tell it. I also think that we have the benefit of miraculous interior and exterior lives, that can be articulated in beautiful ways. And I think part of what we do, filmmaking, is about perspective. It's about point of view. It is a craft that is rooted in that. And so the more that we can think about opening up the perspective, opening up the point of view, it isn't just to be politically correct or inclusive. It is also very practically to push the form, to be able to see things that we have not been able to see in ways that we have not been able to. That's the only way that we will move forward in the craft,
Yeah. Well, Channing and Garrett, talk to me about people who inspire you today. Who is out there, in your words, killing the game that you just look at and you say, wow, you wonder, or you marvel over?
Well, I mean, I'll just say, like, I think that's a great question. I've been sort of I'm going to be totally honest with you. I've been in like a bit of a hole, I think, for the past year, and really I recently like rediscovered Alice Coltrane, which I know I'm like very, very late on the game, but I've been kind of in this place actually of like really looking backwards a little bit, and like who have been what ancestors and women in the world whose shoulders I really stand on, that have helped me to get into the place that I am. I think to your point, 2020, 2021 has been an incredible year in being able to see, Rada and Channing and many, many others that are Crystal, Sophia, that are really being given opportunities, again, not just to be politically correct, but because the craft is really there. The work is really, really good, and it's beautiful. So I feel like I'm honored to be in a space that I'm sharing right now, with so many amazing women.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about
you? I echo that. I look back a lot, I've referenced, some of the women that have been like really inspirational for me. I love Gina Prince Bythewood. She just had the old guard out, but I fell in love with her, like many people, at Love and Basketball, and Beyond the Lights. And, Regina King has her film out now. Like, there's so many people out right now that are making, Black women in particular, that are making like complicated, beautiful work. That was one of the things that I loved about Garrett's film. Like, I hopped on email right after I saw it to tell her I love it so much. I saw, I'm a Black woman that grew up in the South, and so I felt like I saw people I knew, in Garrett's film. And that's why representation is so important, in order for us to see ourselves. I referenced earlier that, that's what Miss Juneteenth was for me. That event was, I was able to see myself. And like, I have I talked about my toddler daughter earlier, and it's important for me that she has her own representation growing up. So I'm happy to see Black women in the space, especially making stories that are centering Black women.
Yeah. Well, we talked about, directors and people that you look up to or you admire now that you think are killing the game. Who are some actors that you would love to direct, each of you? Are there any actors out there that you guys would just love to direct?
Oh my gosh, you're putting me on the hot seat.
I know, I'm like that. I recuse myself from that question because I feel like, I've got my little treasure box.
Okay.
And,
you don't want to put it out there. You just want to keep it to yourself.
That's right. I mean, they're
I'm
killing it
the
though.
same.
You're the same way too. Okay, don't want to put that out there. Well, are there any projects you guys have lined up that you do feel comfortable talking about? Dream passion projects in the future?
You go. I was like, what is she gonna do? What is she gonna say?
I mean, I feel like, you know, I what I will say is that I'm sure, like Channing, you know, you're never just working on one thing, you know,
Right.
you're always working on multiple things, and those things do feed into each other in some kind of way. I feel like at the heart and soul of my work is fundamentally about justice, and the different ways in which justice can be articulated, whether that's through a family, through one woman's experience, through something that's even far more abstract, you know, or whether it's looking at turn of the century cinema, you know. Every single, I mean, I think that again, like sort of just the act of visibility and creating images that people can see to hold systems accountable or to create new truths,
Right.
and how that fits into gender, how that fits into race. Those are things that I'm continuously fascinated by, invested in, and working towards, and how they will be articulated, whether it's in another documentary, whether it's, you know, a scripted film, whether it's a series, it's to be seen. But I know that I'm committed to these overall themes. I don't think that they're a part of me. I don't think that they'll ever leave, you know.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I'm holding like passion projects tight right now.
Oh, don't want to put it out there.
I'm in that creative space where I've got to hold it tight. But you know, I think one of the things that my work has in common is I really like to take people to, you know, a specific place, a unique world, and really focus in on a character's journey in like a really specific, intimate way. And so you'll continue to definitely see that from my work. You know, I obviously, you know, have talked about my love for making stories that center Black women and really, you know, their journeys, and especially Black women and journeys where they've just taken a step forward in their lives. Like you'll continue to see that. I can say, you know, since Miss Juneteenth, I've directed television. Like there's a show called Generation coming out on HBO Max, and that'll be out soon. So I've done that. And then there is a television adaptation of Miss Juneteenth in the works.
Yes.
Like I have a
Congrats.
thank you so much. I have a first look deal with UCP. And so there are other stories that I also want to tell with them, but I just am kind of keeping things close because I'm just one of those people when I'm in that creative space, I just can't talk about it too much.
Yeah. I do want to add though to Channing, like, I mean, something that I feel like Miss Juneteenth does so effectively and so beautifully, and that I'm so excited to keep seeing, you know, in the work that you're doing, and that I think is certainly going to influence other people, is also, you know, that story was so rooted in specificity, but it also opened this broader understanding that was historical, that was, you know, very much rooted in a certain kind of geography and way of thinking. And so you had this, I think, really beautiful juxtaposition of something that was like both the macro and the micro, you know, all in one, which I think is profound storytelling, because it helps us to situate ourselves and how can we see ourselves in this one storyline, even if we can't relate to it in maybe its most exact form, we understand how it's important in this sort of broader sense, in an American historical sense, and in the present moment. And I think you do such an incredible job at being able to balance those two things. And when you watch film, sometimes, you know, I think right now audiences really want to know, why should I care about something? Why should I feel invested in anything when there's so much that's happening in the world? And I think you do such a beautiful job of bridging the gap between the big and the small and the historic and the personal. And
I really appreciate that, Garrett. You know, I have such a love for culture, and like I think history, like, you know, drives me, because I'm always really considerate about, like, you know, how history has informed us, especially as Black people in this country, and what we take forward and what we choose to leave behind, you know. And I really was focusing in on the humanity of these characters and the richness of the world. But thematically, I was also really focused on what freedom meant to each of these characters, especially like Juneteenth is really centered on, I'm telling people what they know, especially in this conversation, but on the fact that my ancestors, who were enslaved people in Texas didn't get their freedom until 2.5 years after, they were actually free. And it's just still mind boggling to me every time I say this in conversation that happened and, how that informs who we are today. And so it was important to me to bring that to Miss Juneteenth. And I really want to continue to create these really specific, culturally rich stories. And, that was one of the things that I saw right away in your work, Garrett, was just this, first of all, my favorite filmmakers all, have kind of this way that I feel like they bring poetry to screen. I love Charles Burnett's work. I love Jonathan Demme. I remember when I saw Cassie Lemon's Eve's Bayou, it blew my mind. And like Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust, there's always this like really like, there's this poetry on screen, but there's also this specificity of place, which just makes you fall in. And that's what I saw in your work, Garrett, and it just transported me. So I wanted to thank you for it.
Oh, love with each other. That's great. That's great. I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to speak to you women, because I have a feeling in the coming years, you'll both be delivering Oscar speeches. I really do feel that way. You guys are just great, great, great filmmakers. So I'm so happy we had the opportunity to talk to you so we can say, we knew them when, we had them first.
Thank you,
They
KJ.
were with AAFCA first. Well,
Appreciate
thank
that.
you, ladies, so much for taking the time out of your schedule, your busy schedules, to speak with us today. We really do appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I just want to remind everyone that next week, the African American Film Critics Association will announce its nomination for the AFCA Awards. And then coming up on April 7th, the AFCA Awards will be held. It'll be virtual this year because remember, we are living in the midst of a pandemic. So the awards will go on. It'll just be virtual, but I hope everyone will tune in. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your schedule to listen to this discussion today. Have a great day and thank you so much.
Thank you.